Hello, my name's David Sumpter and welcome to the video lectures for the course Modelling Complex Systems. I think the first thing we need to think about when we're studying complex systems is how to define them. It's always good to start a course with a bit of definition. And the best way, I think, really to define a complex system is in pictures. So what I'm going to do is give you a few different pictures of a variety of complex systems and say, well, why I think that they're quite complex. I'm going to start at a low scale, at a chemical reaction scale, and build up to the scale of the universe and discuss different examples of complex systems that come up at these different levels. So let's start with a chemical reaction. This is a pattern created by the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction. You see, I need to read that. We normally call it the BZ reaction. And the BZ reaction is created just by mixing a few chemicals together, 4 different chemicals, some acids, and you have them in a particular setup, and they produce these pretty patterns. I'm not going to go into any of the details of the chemical reactions, but the important point to note here is that they produce these kind of spherical patterns first, then they produce kind of spiraling waves, and they make a lot of pretty patterns. They make a lot of complex patterns. So that's really just the basic mix of chemicals, but we can see complex patterns in more advanced systems. And so this is one of my favorite complex systems. This is a singular cellular organism called the Fusarium slime mold. Now, the Fusarium slime mold produces a complex network of tubes through which it moves nutrients, through which it collects food and so on. And what you can see here is the front of the tube. I'm going to play a little video now. What's shown in this video is a slime mold spreading out, growing, and there are different species of slime molds, but in every case they're producing some sort of pulsating pattern that grows and spreads, builds tubes, expands, and this is all through some local interactions within the body of the slime mold. And we see complex patterns throughout biology. Here I've got a picture of a seashell. This is from Hans Meinhardt's book on the algorithmic beauty of seashells. The real seashell is on the left, and on the right is a mathematical simulation he's made of seashell patterns. We'll come back to that. But the point here is that you get these lovely, beautiful, complex patterns even in the most simple developmental processes, even when you're talking about seashells. And if we go a step further in development, this is a video of a development of a zebrafish. What we see here is the formations of the different parts. It's really early stage development. But the important point is that through time, through a series of chemical reactions and physical processes, some sort of complicated pattern emerges, and eventually this egg will turn into a zebrafish. And the same is true when we study human development, for example. This is a human embryo in early developmental stages, and you can see already the structure of the legs, the structure of the feet, and even the structure of the brain as the development takes place. And this is definitely a complex system. I think in some ways humans can be defined as the most complex system that we know. And certainly the human brain is one of the most complicated and complex systems that we know. Again, the brain consists of a multitude of patterns, of firing neurons, of electricity, of physical and chemical processes, all of them combining to produce the thoughts that we have in our head. Another type of complex system can be seen when you have interactions of animals. So this is a flock of starlings flying in the evening light, and they produce these sort of complicated, moving, dynamical shapes with twists and turns, and the group seem to move in unison, seem to move all together as one. Animals don't only interact to produce complex patterns, but they also build complicated shapes. So this is an example produced by Walter Schinkel. What he did is he dug up fire ant nests and found these complicated branching structures under the ground. Some of these are 4 meters deep into the ground, built by a tiny colony of ants. And humans, of course, well, we produce probably the most complex social structures of all. This is an example from a study by some physicists in the States, and what they looked at is mosh pits. So when you jump around and dance at a concert, what sort of patterns are produced? And they were able to show that through the interactions of the individuals within the mosh pit, certain complex patterns like spirals, like moving, travelling waves would come out of the interactions between the individuals. You can think of a lot of the spread of biological processes as complex systems as well. This is an example from the modelling of the spread of foot and mouth disease in Britain about 10 or so years ago. And there you see the spread of disease moving out from some central points. And we can also, as shown here, you can start to build mathematical models to understand the spread of this disease. Another example of a complex system is the stock market. And we've just seen, or the last few years, we've seen a lot of turmoil on the stock market with it going up and down. And a lot of that is because the stock market is just something that's too complicated for us to understand. There's so many intricate interactions that it's very difficult to predict how it's going to work and what's going to happen in it. And recently, physicists have been thinking a lot about, well, how can we understand the stock market? And some of them have even gone as far as to say, well, how can we actually understand all our social interactions? And there's one project called the Future ICT Project, which is aimed at building up a model, a sort of crisis laboratory for understanding our human social systems. I'm not completely convinced that we can really build a social simulation of our entire world, but it is interesting to see how we can treat our social interactions as a complex system and try to understand it. I think I promised to have a picture of the universe, and that's what I've got finally here. The universe is the picture on the, or this is a galaxy. There's a picture on the right, and you see this type of spiraling shape in the galaxy. And we can also think of those types of natural physical patterns, these geographic patterns, as being a complex system. And these happen on every scale, down from little sand piles up to these rotating galaxies. So what is a complex system? Well, what I've done is I've shown you lots of pretty pictures. And I think, for me, that is allowed as a definition here. We're allowed to say a complex system is anything which produces an interesting form or shape that we want to try and understand. But this is a course on modelling complex systems. And so I just want to have an extra twist in that definition. And that extra twist turns out to be central to what we do from now on. And the extra twist is this. We say that a complex system is any system that makes a complex pattern and which we believe we can understand better using some type of mathematical model. So if for any of those systems I've just shown you, we think we can build a mathematical model that allows us to better understand how those systems work, then we can call it a complex system. And it turns out for all those systems I've just shown you, I mentioned mathematical models a couple of times, but it turns out for all those systems I've shown you, it is possible to build some form of mathematical model that helps us to understand it. Now, my definition that we can use mathematical models to understand something is kind of a very weak definition, but I'm not a big fan of definitions. You can go online and you can find larger definitions and more concrete definitions about what a complex system is. But for our purposes, the most important thing is that it's a system we can try and understand with mathematical modelling.